Hi all, and welcome to my new video related to Bitcoin education. In particular, I will start today to deep dive more on Austrian School of Economics, because to understand Bitcoin, and more specific, the Bitcoin monetary value proposition, is important to understand the principle of the Austrian School of Economics. We will start with part 1, Human Action, and the reference book will be Principle of Economics, written by Saifedean Ammous. In particular, its first chapter is Human Action. I strongly recommend you to read this book as well. Let's start with how Ludwig von Mises, one of the greatest economists of the Austrian school, defined economics. Economics is not about things and tangible objects. It is about men, their meaning and their actions. Goods, commodity and wealth and all the other notions of conduct are not elements of nature. They are elements of human meaning and conduct. He who wants to deal with them must not look at the external world, he must search for them in the meaning of acting men. And as the title of the presentation is saying, at the core of economics is the human action. Mises in fact believed on proper economic. Reasoning and analysis of economic phenomena must be based on analyzing human action. In 1871, Menger introduced the law of marginal utility, we will discuss in the next presentation, that provided a starkly different alternative to the previous methods of analyzing humans. It showed that society is better understood by its prime driving forces, individual human choice and action. Mises defines action as purposeful behavior, to be distinguished from instinctive, impulsive, or emotional acts. Actions is will put into operation and transformed into an agency. Is aiming at ends and goals. Is the ego's meaningfully response to stimuli and the condition of its environment, to the state of universe that determines life. Rational actions is the human quality that distinguishes humans from animals. In fact, a human acts purposefully because we are endowed with reasons and are able to direct it to the meaning of our ends. Humans are capable of recognizing causal relationship in the world around us and acting upon this understanding to bring a more favorable state of affairs. According to Mises, intimate objects are dead matter, and it is human actions that rearrange that matter and give it value, meaning and purpose. One understands the material world far better if one studies it as the product of human reason and action. If you want to understand the condition of the material world, it is most useful to study the actions of the human who shape it. In this context, rational is defined as the product of deliberative reason, not at the correctness of the action according to some objective criteria. The opposite, in fact, of action is not irrational behavior, but a reactive response to stimuli on the part of the bodily organs and instinct which cannot be controlled by the volition of the person concerned. Now let's go on economic analysis. At the heart of the Austrian approach to economics is the goal of understanding the causal processes of economic activity and their consequences. Logical deduction through experiments is an approach that appears banal and fruitless in comparison of mainstream economics today, which rely on mathematical analysis. But a closer look shows us why quantitative analysis is meaningless and mute without the logical deduction and conclusions to motivate it and understand its results. Human actions will be understood through logical deduction and thought experiment, not equation and quantitative analysis. As you have seen already, it's a very different approach versus modern economics, or also called Keynes economics. Let's deep dive on quantitative analysis. So Mises' critics in human action on quantitative analysis is the following. The fundamental deficiency implied in every quantitative approach to economic problems consists in neglecting the fact that there are no constant relations between what are called economics dimensions. In fact, there is no standard unit which economic measurements of value can be made and compared, because value is subjective. And value will be the focus on the second presentation, also on the second chapter of the book of Safdin Ammos. The utility that individuals get from goods is also subjective and constantly changing based on the individual, the time at which they are making the valuation, and the relative abundance of the good. This we will come back later on with the law of marginal utility. There is no possibility for aggregate interpersonal utility comparison, and therefore the mathematization of utility will always be hypothetical and theoretical, and never precise and replicable. Without a common unit with which to measure and compare utility, it is impossible to formulate a quantitative law around, for example, changes in demand and supply based on changes in price. Such a law posting that a 1% increase in price corresponds to a certain percentage decrease of it in quantity demanded is impossible to quantify. The impact of a change in price is having on an individual demand for a good happens through the causal mechanism of changes in individual assessed utility. That factor, in fact, cannot be measured or quantified. Replicable experimentation on economics questions is also impossible. In fact, natural science studies the structure and behavior of the physical world. It is assumed that these are regular and their properties can be isolated and observed by repeatable experimentation, and they can be appropriately and fully modeled with mathematics. So one thing is natural science. But the objects of study of the social science and the idea of and actions of humans, which are immeasurable, are the idea and actions of humans, which are immeasurable and not quantifiable. The real world is the only laboratory that can approximate the real conditions shaping economic decision making. But it is impossible to experiment on the real world using scientific methods such as those employed in the natural science. Fact, whereas in the natural science regularities and constants are discovered through repeated open experimentation, empirical economists simply make the assumption that their data is regularly and deduce law based on it. In natural science, the complexity of the atoms that make up a gas can be reduced to basic aggregate measures of pressure, temperature, and volume without any loss in analytical accuracy. In fact, the atoms have no will on their own, they have no mind, they cannot reason, and they cannot act in response to surrounding conditions, as human beings can. When examining economic questions, however, we are confronted with the reality that human beings and their actions are the causative factors shaping economic reality, motivated by their subjective consideration and personal preference. And just because we are able to construct measures of unemployment, gross domestic production or GDP, consumption, investment, and other economic quantities, does not mean that these factors are causally related to one another in scientific preordinated relationships based on quantifiable and testable magnitudes. In fact, since the actual drivers of these measures are the actions of the individuals, there is no reason to suppose that they are any more superficial epiphenomena are related to the causal mechanism driven in the relationship examined. There is not to say that all statistical measures are worthless noise, but the Austrian objection is not on economic statistics per se, but on attempting to build scientific seeming theories out of statistical aggregates. The biggest attempt to imitate the scientific world happens, in fact, in macroeconomics. Hayek called it scientism, the slavish imitation of the method and the language of science where it is inapplicable. The hope is that with an accurate scientific system of equations for understanding the working process of an economy, it will become possible to manage economic activity to achieve desirable goals. In the same way that chemist equations have helped engineers to perfect and optimize the working for engineers and pumps, scientism search for economic equations that can help economists to improve the state of an economy. But we can see that if we deep dive in Keynes system, we can see that it's not possible. In fact, the Keynes system, Keynes system has formulated equations based on Keynes' theoretical hypothesis. The state of the economy is primarily a reflection of the amount of spending. If spending is too high compared to output, then inflation and growth are the outcome. But if spending is too low compared to the output, then unemployment and recession are the outcome. Should unemployment be too high, modern economic equations suggest that this can be fixed by increasing aggregate spending through increasing government spending or expansionary monetary policies. High inflation, on the other hand, can be fixed by reducing aggregate spending through taxes or contractionary credit policies. But accounting identities do not denote real-world causality. There are no mechanisms in microeconomics to experimentally establish causality as is possible in the natural science. Keynes' equations attempted to predict the impact of one aggregate metric on one another bear no relationship to the real-world cause and effect, because there is no way of measuring, testing, and verifying any of it, because one cannot experiment on entire economics comprising of millions of people who have individual life plans. A clear example is Keynes' system implies that a trade-off between unemployment rate and inflation rate. But the real-world experience does not show this, as it can be seen from 60 years of US government statistics. However, this theory persists to this day. Hilariously, Keynesians simply revised the theory, introducing the term supply shock to justify unemployment and inflation can happen simultaneously. After a century of aping physics and abandoning a classical methodological foundation, economics has failed to produce one quantitative law or formula that can be independently tested and replicated. Let's go now with the last part of human action with a clear example. A contrast of approaches, an example is the minimum wage policy. According to modern economics, a new law, for example, of $10 per hour as minimum wage could help 20% of all workers who are actually working and earning under it. It's just an example. In specific, the minimum wage will lead to a rise in wage to 10 billion per year, generating increasing in consumer spending and therefore in a creation of new jobs. This could be a microeconomics equation related to modern economics. It looked to be a great boon for the society, with the poorest people earning more and increase the living standard. Things look different with the Austrian approach. Employment is an agreement between two. In fact, employment is an agreement between two individuals, the employer and the employee. The business owner would hire an employee only if his contribution is higher than his wage. A wage are not just arbitrary numbers chosen by greedy employers, but they are also a reflection of the marginal productivity of the worker. With the new minimum wage, the employer has to reconsider hiring a new employee or not, and he will hire only the employees whose productivity is higher than the minimum wage. In general, it will result in an elimination of jobs held by workers whose productivity is lower than the minimum wage. Those workers are usually the poorest, youngest, and the least experienced workers. Therefore, the minimum wage law is particularly pernicious to the people who need to work the most, and they are causal factor in the emergence of wide-scale unemployment, as well as employability. In fact, mandating laws against a human self-interest nature does not change human nature. It reduces the incentive to behave legally, and so destroy society respect for law. This essential realization is why the sound economist is in favor of individual economic freedom and against this restriction by the government. And with this, we are at the end of our first lecture. For the next lecture, the second part will be on value. See you in one of the next videos. Bye.